Welcome everyone. We're just going to wait for a minute or so before we start the webinar to allow all of our participants to stream in. So just bear with us for another minute or so. Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening and good morning to some of our participants today. Welcome to our fourth and penultimate webinar of the series, Accelerating Progress Towards the Sustainable Development Goals and the Role and Contribution of Universities. Today, we're delighted to welcome our partners from Stellenbosch University Business School. Today's webinar will focus on delivering social impact through transformative community engagements. And Dr. Armand Bam, the Head of Social Impact at the Business School, will be leading the webinar, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from him and the Business School partners and students of how they've taken a transformational approach to social impact, embedding their three interrelated dimensions of responsible leadership, including me, we, and all of us. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you for the rest of the session. Thanks, Armand.
Thank you, Fiona, Tracy, and Andrew for providing us with an opportunity to share of our experiences at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. We often don't look at social impact and issues of sustainability with a social justice slant, and so we appreciate that you've allowed us the opportunity to share our academic disposition with that of the voices of those with whom we partner to deliver social impact and address the sustainable development goals. To those of you who are joining us at the webinar, welcome. And with that being said, context is important. And so in 1994, the welcome you probably would have received from me would have been one located in a time of great excitement and euphoria. And there was lots of optimism that stemmed from our newfound democracy and freedom here in South Africa. And essentially there was hope, talk of a rainbow nation, and this excitement about the prospects of a promise of a better society for all. 25 years on, instead, I'm welcoming you to this webinar from the land of greatest inequality. And so the World Bank records South Africa's Gini coefficient at over 63 points. It is important that as we move through our session today, I share this context with you in terms of where it is we as the University of Stellenbosch Business School operates on a local level and where it is that we really draw our motivation from to make a difference. In this session, I'm joined by an MBA student, Junaid Sonday, and Khaironisa Johnson-Kasim, the CEO of the Mustada Foundation, that was impacted through our social engagement project, as well as Amanda Slowe and Marlene Snell, trustees of the Torres Foundation, one of our community partnerships that has been developing over the past year. And so the notion of community remains a contested topic. And so the intent here is rather to address the nature of our engagements and the origins of our social impact initiatives. And as you have seen in the title, there's this idea that we want our engagements to be transformational. So for us at the USB, we see that these relationships exist on a continuum between what can be considered transactional, transitional, or transformational. So what does this represent in terms of transactional, transitional, or transformational engagements. When we look at the characteristics of a transactional engagement, they tend to be about community investment, the notion of giving back. It is characterized by being occasional, and the communication stems from the university or the institution itself towards the partner. Often charitable in its approach and has this philanthropic nature to it. And essentially for us as an institution, if it was that we were to engage like this, learning is transferred, or might I even dare to say, imposed from the institution's perspective. If it was that we had to view this in another way, it would be regional, which tends to involve the talk of involvement, building bridges, consultations. These are terms that we often hear in engagements, but they still remain more focused on what it is that the institution is able to deliver or wants. These engagements tend to be repeated, and most of the learning still is transferred from the institution. But what it is that we aspire to at the University of Stellenbosch Business School is really partnerships that are transformational. Where it is that there's an integration in terms of community, that what it is that we set out to do leads to a change in society. There's joint project management and decision making about what the problems are that we want to be solving, and the communication flows freely between the two parties or more than the two parties. And essentially for us is this notion of shared learning, where it is that we take what it is that our partners, whether they're students or community organizations, and we bring that into our sphere. So let me share some of the crucial foundational blocks and how social impact and addressing the SDGs is placed within USD. And here I must give credit to Professor Arnold Smith, who was quite instrumental in ensuring that social impact is embedded within the USB. At USB, we consider the integration of ethics, responsibility, and sustainability from 4 perspectives. First, we recognize that the importance of being able to influence and engage with challenges of sustainability, ethics, and responsibility occurs at a global, continental, and a local level. Secondly, we look internally at our mission and identity and the values that we espouse, and we acknowledge that our purpose and our role in society is intimately linked to this. So more than just using these words, we acknowledge that there's an aspect of having to do. Thirdly, we acknowledge that we are able to address our own practices as a school and as an institution through evaluating our contributions. So we're quite self-critical and we look inwards quite often. And then finally, we are keenly aware of the fact that those who engage with us come to conclusions about us and how we relate to the various sectors within society. And so bearing in mind that our university has intimate links to the apartheid machinery of the past and the inequalities that we experience in society today, we have to consistently build trust in the face of our history. And this, I believe, is best faced head on. And we'll see where it is that some of this has led to in terms of meaningful change in society through the partnerships that we're going to hear from today. So back to some of our context in terms of ERS. And although we recognize that we must be responsive to global phenomena such as climate change and environmental degradation, political, economic, and social instability, in relation to broader issues of sustainability, USD is still cognizant of its role that it has to play locally in addressing issues such as poverty, inequality, education, health infrastructure, and corruption. And so we want our students to be equipped to live and lead effectively in a responsible manner with integrity in this complex and multi-layered world. So we also expect our faculty to be knowledgeable of these issues, and our program content must bring this about. It's one thing talking about poverty and hunger when it is that you have not immersed yourself in those issues. So where does this all fit in at USB? What has been instrumental in elevating the importance of social impact and sustainability at USB is the integration of social impact as a portfolio, as a key pillar alongside teaching and learning and the research portfolios. So these three pillars do not function in isolation. Essentially, they're connected in multiple planes, and they move together to reinforce our dedicated focus on developing responsible leaders for society. So in September 2015, the USB's Management Committee inaugurated a USB social impact portfolio with the following decision, with an evident commitment towards adopting a social orientation and understanding the impact of our curricula and research, the need to be part of the social dialogue and policy development that is taking place within our country, and that when we speak of social impact, we acknowledge the engagement with our stakeholders that have to be collaborative in order to ensure that we can address issues of sustainability. And so we explain our understanding of what social impact means in practice. For us, social impact is about creating hope and advancing change for a flourishing world. So if you go to our website, you'll see this statement placed there. And this emanates from our teaching and our learning and the research that we conduct, as well as how it is that we strive to be responsible leaders who work with others to enhance the quality of life, creating a spirit of generosity, and really addressing the notion of having to work for a fair and just society. And so our approach to social impact is embedded in the three interrelated dimensions of responsible leadership, where it is that we speak about the me, we, and all of us. And quite simplistically, on the me level, we look at our people and what it is that they deliver in terms of the involvement around sustainability and delivering social impact. We look at our programs and how that is connected to improving the understanding of these issues. And the all of us comes back to how it is that we're able to influence what it is that happens within the policy domain. So in relation to the institution as a whole, the business school forms a small part or a division within the economic and management sciences faculty. We address the SDGs in the following manner. So there are a number of frameworks that we lean on, but I want to share this with you because it is important in terms of our focus on sustainability. And so we address the SDGs in the following manner. We subscribe to them from an academic, a teaching and a learning and a research perspective, as well as an institutional perspective, where it is that we strive to be a sustainable organization that pursues sustainability in terms of economic, social, and environmental terms. And in this regard, USB also collaborates with the university and different faculties through what has been categorized as the SDG themes for the university. So there are 7 themes in order to ensure a better alignment between the university's mission, the work of its academic faculties, and then also considering the national, continental, and our other position. So these thematic clusters, as you can see, are quite evident. We focus on a broad perspective around education for all, employment and inclusive economic development, food security and health, social justice, resources and infrastructure, environment and sustainability, and then safety, security, and good governance. And the idea of clustering them together was essentially to ensure the alignment with what our mission is. So what do we want to have in terms of our engagements with stakeholders? So in addressing the SDGs, we place a lot of emphasis on our stakeholders. And this is then operationalized in various ways. And I want to share with you how it is that we define what the outcomes are we hope for our stakeholders, which guides the school in different ways. So there are 4 elements. We look at our students and we want them to be responsible leaders and stewards of society. We look at our social sector partnerships and the beneficiaries, and we want them to be able to claim that they can create outstanding public value. We look at our research and our thought leadership, and that must impact on public opinion and policy formulation. And then the notion of our stakeholders that co-create social impact solutions to ensure that we can address sustainable development priorities. But for today, what I'd like to do is address the first 2 of those issues. And with regards to our students as responsible leaders and stewards of society, Junaid will share a bit of his story later on. But we look at our ERS-related intentionality through our academic programs. And our MBA provides us one particular opportunity. There are many, but the one particular opportunity that Junaid will share a little bit later on is about our social engagement project, where students do an individual reflective assignment based on a period of involvement with a nonprofit organization. Our students on that MBA program are also required to participate in a group project, where it is they form a social and ethics committee, and to some degree role play their understanding of how to address these ERS challenges through a case study. And then a number of other assignments where students are expected to integrate, among other related frameworks, perspectives from the Sustainable Development Goals. With respect to our social sector beneficiaries, we really look to create that value. And here we focus on capacity building for 3 groups of the social sector. We have a small business academy, and we focus on small business entrepreneurs. And then we have nonprofit organizations and their leaders. And we also have some aspects where it is that we relate and engage with education and school leadership. So in relation to community outreach and public service, following on from our mission and our values-based approach, we try and create a space for faculty, staff, and students really to engage in specifically socially defined activities that make a difference to the knowledge and the skills of these small business owners and nonprofit managers. And this work is not prescribed by policy. Its sustainability is really supported in terms of our educational design, the delivery systems, and then also our governance. And so I've placed what these key activities are, and let me just share a bit more about them. In 2012, we established a small business academy, which aims to improve the businesses and therefore the lives of small business owners from low-income communities. And so this is achieved through a 9-month small business academy development program, which is currently delivered in the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and more recently we've expanded to host an academy like this closer to our main campus in Stellenbosch. And so since its inception, it's evolved into a multi-stakeholder project with small business owners as participants, companies as partners and funders, and the faculty and students as researchers, mentors, and also educators. We have recently had international student involvement, and we're hoping to grow that particular aspect of it. One of the interesting stories that has come out of the Small Business Academy was how it led to participants who had to follow a RPL process, recognition of prior learning process, how it has taken one of the participants from that process through to our MBA program and being an alumnus of the MBA program. When we speak about the nonprofit managers and leaders, our USB management program, which is offered by the USB alumni and coordinated from our director's office, who acts as a patron for the program, has been running for 20 years. It's the longest standing social impact program that we have, which came from students who had won a competition and decided they needed to plow back. So in this week-long program, managers and leaders are equipped with basic managerial skills and addressing how to manage nonprofit organizations. And from that, what we were able to do in 2017 was we won a social impact grant from the university itself, after motivating for the need to create another level in terms of nonprofit leaders' academic trajectory, where it was that we were able to develop the postgraduate diploma in leadership development, specifically focused on nonprofit leaders. And so this tertiary level program had its first intake of students in 2020, and we're busy with our second cohort now that started this year. And essentially the contribution there is to a sector which, when we look at COVID-19 and its impact, has largely propped up what has been required to happen. And so in addition to these two programs, there are other NPO related engagements that we have, the social engagement project and our community partnerships, which are critical for delivering various opportunities around in a collaborative manner. So we've created and embedded these partnerships within a cluster of engagement, almost akin to developing a circular economy of support for these nonprofit organizations. It's in its infancy now, but they're essentially themed around three aspects for us: education, the environment, and economic interests. And the idea is over the next 3 to 5 years to build a set of partnerships. We've set the target of 9 partnerships, which will be brought into the university itself, the business school itself, and from there create multiple levels of engagements, which would hopefully assist with sustaining those organizations and how it is that they go about addressing the SDGs. So that's a bit of the context in terms of the University of Stellenbosch Business School, how it views social impact, what frameworks it leans on in terms of positioning its sustainability initiatives. But I really think the most important part of today's session is to get a sense of how this translates to real impact. And in terms of understanding what that impact is, one needs to ask those who we partner with. And at this stage, I want to introduce Amanda and Marlene, who are trustees of the Torres Foundation, to share their particular connection to the USB. I've asked the partners to be extremely critical about their relationship with the USB, because there's an opportunity for us to hear what it is that we can improve on, and those who are also participating to get a sense of what the real challenges are in terms of partnerships that are directed at addressing the SDGs. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Amanda and Marlene, who can join me now. And they will share their journey, where it is that they come from, how it is that they got connected to USB, and what the challenges and the successes have been thus far.
Thank you, Armand. Hello, everybody. I'm Amanda Slowe, and this is Marlene Snell, my partner and a co-trustee of Torres Foundation. Thank you, USB, for inviting us to speak as your social impact partner. Marlene and I are both trustees of Torres Foundation. We originally both worked at the same law firm in London, and that's how our connection began. Until such time as we both became fairly dissatisfied with the law and decided that it was time to improve the lives of others. It sounds cliched, I know, but you get to a point in life where you actually want to use your experience in a different and possibly a more satisfying way. Marlene, do you want to say hi briefly?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm very happy to join you today. I'm Marlene, as Amanda said, and I was born and brought up in Singapore and moved to England about 20 years ago and practiced in the same law firm in London with Amanda. She told me in about 2018 that she'd started this charitable foundation in South Africa using the medium of debate to promote social engagement in high school students. And she asked if I could help her as it was growing, and she wanted someone to work with. So I initially agreed to join for a couple of months, but actually having seen the transformational effect that the program has had on our students in South Africa, I agreed to be a trustee and commit to the foundation. And yes, we've haven't looked back since. Over back to you, Amanda.
Okay, thanks. Let's start. Okay, can you see that now? Yep. Is the screen share on?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, Torres Foundation is a UK charity, as I've said, which was conceived in the aftermath of the Utøya massacre in Norway in 2011, the deadliest attack on Norwegian soil since the Second World War. I don't know if any of you recall it, but Anders Breivik, a far-right extremist, put on a police uniform and gained access to the beautiful island of Utøya, where youth were gathering for a summer camp. They were idealistic, they were political, they were young. Most were young members of the governing Labour Party, and by the end of the day, well, within an hour and a half, 69 of them had been shot by him. It's still the largest mass shooting by any single government and sent horror waves through Norway and through the world. Tore Eikeland was one of them. He was 21 years old. He was a brilliant speaker. He was a youth activist. He could turn a room around with his persuasive abilities. He had traveled to Africa several times and noted on his return each time the lack of political engagement with the youth there. He also valued the importance of oratory skills and being able to express yourself coherently. He was passionate, he was brave, and at the memorial service in Oslo Cathedral, the then Prime Minister of Norway, Jens Stoltenberg, who's now head of NATO, singled him out as possibly a future Prime Minister of the country. I didn't know him personally, but I had a mutual contact who did. And as a gut reaction, we together decided to set up this charity with his family to give his ideas a voice and to give him some form of legacy. Our seed funding came from a wonderful Norwegian foundation called the Calvary Trust, who are still supporters of us today and without whom we really couldn't have got our ideas off the ground. We decided to start in South Africa. That was the easy decision. I was born and educated there, and it's still very much my homeland. And I've always been conscious of the privileged education I had and the disparities of education, which, as Armand has referred to, were the legacies of the apartheid era. Sadly, this is still true today. Children need skills for life. They need confidence. They need self-assurance. They need inspiring. They need to be groomed as a way as leaders of the future. I've always been fascinated by the power of words and how they can be usually best employed when used to their best impact. So this was going to be our essence. We were not educationists. We couldn't even get involved in their actual education or improving it, but we could give them the skills and tools to make the most of themselves in life. And this was going to be our tribute to Torre Eichland. And so Torre's foundation began. Sorry, let me just. Our mission, well, our vision really was to encourage discussion and debate amongst young people in South Africa to foster democracy and social change. We wanted to create democratically engaged communities. We set up in 2017, and we wanted to help children develop their opinions and their confidence to voice them. We were both very aware of the importance of debating as a life skill. It's the cornerstone of functioning democracies, and terribly important that citizens can engage in critical analysis and articulate and defend arguments. This leads to confidence, it's self-belief, and helps children change their lives and with it their communities. Our motto was to give the children the fishing rod rather than the fish, the tools with which they could better their own societies, improve their families, and not rely on outside support in any way. It was not easy in the beginning. It was challenging and it was difficult. We started in 2 schools in January 2017 in Cape Town in an area called the Cape Flats. They were poor schools, their facilities weren't great, and they regularly had to close because of gang violence and problems at the schools. By March 2020, when COVID set in, we were working in 25 schools, reaching 500 students a week. These were all, no, they weren't all, they were primarily township schools in and around Cape Town. It became a very successful program, and we were delighted with the success. It got to the point where schools were approaching us to ask to join our debating program, and we were constantly considering how big to grow it, whether to sort of roll it out across the Western Cape. We had dreams of rolling it out to South Africa, but these were all pipeline dreams. Debating competitions were held monthly in the Castle of Good Hope, which is an iconic and landmark building in Cape Town, and one to which many of the children only aspired to go into. I mean, to see their faces when they were debating in this room, which is part of the oldest building actually in South Africa, was just quite wonderful. What we did was based on, similarly as Stellenbosch had its 3 pillars, we had our 3 pillars, although they were obviously very different. Ours were to engage and to educate and empower. We engaged the children first through weekly debating clubs. These were held after school in their specific schools. And at these clubs, they were taught the rudiments, well, more than the rudiments of debating, all the skills of debating. They became proficient at it. By the 2nd year, the education element was interposed, where we widened their horizons and curiosity. The topics they debated on were extensive. They were social, they were political. They learned about their country, their history. So I think we pride ourselves on Torre's Foundation in not being a debating charity. What we're trying to do is educate the children politically and about their societies through the medium of debate. Debate becomes the framework into which the education is imposed. We took children around the city to landmarks they'd never been. Some of them had never actually left their local communities. We had summer and winter camps in the country. And again, some children had never been into the countryside or seen animals before. The third pillar of what we tried to do was our empowering level. And here we encouraged them to become active and engaged members of the society, to participate in local politics, and to challenge themselves to try and see what was wrong with their own lives and the communities they lived in, and try and better it for themselves. Youth are important for the future of Africa. Armand told me yesterday that 70% of the African population is aged between 15 and 25. They are the future of Africa, and they need the help and the tools to maximize their potential. We want to give them an advantage in their future life. The confidence, the self-assurance, whether they're going for an interview or applying to university, the power to communicate well, to have arguments constructively and not aggressively. And I think these are all, we cannot improve their education, but we can give them the self-worth to maximize their own potential. Our impact has been more widespread than we actually ever envisaged. It starts in the schools, where the children who participate in our debating classes contribute more to classroom, listen more, question more in the lessons. It then filters through, interesting enough, into their own households, where they are now more politically aware, more socially aware. And I understand from conversations that they give their parents the run for their money. They question them, they challenge them on their views, particularly around the time of the 2019 election in South Africa. Whereas stories I've heard of how our students really questioned their parents and what they stood for and what they believed in, and why they voted in a particular way. We've had some inspirational stories as well about a particular girl called Jade, who came from a very abusive family. She was a participant in one of our women's only groups, and having not spoken at all for the first 6 sessions or so, is now a leader of a similar group and being a facilitator in her own right, having found her voice and become a role model to children, because she could understand their own problems and where she'd been. I had a little boy come up to me once after a debate I'd listened to, who told me that he was just walking past the classroom a year before, and he just sort of drifted in to find out what was going on. And he's now one of our most proficient debaters, and is so grateful the chance led him to fall into the classroom that day. We also have children who never opened their mouths in the beginning and now won't ever shut up. So it's been very stimulating to see, and exciting. We help children find internships as well. So we try and get as many internships on our books as possible, and we place children in internships that suit them. And this, of course, helps with subsequent university applications. We also help directly with university applications. One of our students has just won a very recognized Carl Flower scholarship, which enables her to go to Cape Town University to study law next year. We have a strong alumni, which has stayed involved and helps us as facilitators, as moderators at debates. During our last trip to Cape Town in February 2020, Marlene and I had great aspirations. The main purpose of our trip was to get local trustees on board to increase awareness and exposure for our charity. This was literally 2 weeks before the world shut down with COVID. But it is when we met Dr. Armand Bam, who believed that our charity and USB could be a good fit as educational partners. And thank goodness he did, because COVID-19 hit and USB have been unbelievably helpful to us during this last year. Marlene is now going to tell you about what happened in 2020 and how things changed.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so we had the good fortune, I would say, of meeting Armand while we were in South Africa in March 2020. And just as COVID hit, and when we came back, all the schools had been closed in South Africa, and South Africa was in lockdown. And obviously then our after-school debating clubs had all come to an abrupt halt. And so we had to think about what we could do to keep our students engaged. So we started off with the WhatsApp debate groups, where we tried to engage our students that way. But of course, that was limited because it couldn't be spontaneous, and it was all through messaging, whereas debating is all part of a more presentational and research and things like that. So we then started discussions with Armand and USB about the possibility of a Zoom debate platform. And Armand kindly offered the USB platform for us to pilot some debates. The difficulties we had, of course, was, the students came from disadvantaged backgrounds, they didn't have devices, they didn't have data. And so we had to purchase a lot more devices and buy them data, and also do sort of practice Zoom classes with them. But we launched our first debate in June 2020 in association with USB, where Armand was the moderator, and also various professors from USB came on to give inspirational speeches to the kids and also judge the debates. And that went very well. Initially, the kids were really nervous, but then they really stood up to make themselves counted, I suppose, and were very keen for the debates to continue. And so we did do a session of about 7 debates, and the students improved each time. And that led us to realize that actually, if we had a proper online platform, that would be something that could actually reach, a much wider range of students all across the Western Cape. So with the assistance of USB, we have now been trying to work out how we can do that. And the 2 aspects are preparing the content, and then designing the website. So USB are currently helping us with preparing the content, and we hope that will be done by May, and then we will look to the design platform, and that's where we will be looking for students to help us with to create a dynamic and engaged platform for our students. And I know Armand said that we should criticize USB as much as we want, but actually they've been incredibly helpful to us. And we've been very lucky that they've taken us on as a community partner, so that to give us the chance to grow even and to move on during this COVID pandemic. So over to you, Amanda.
Okie doke. Need another slide. So what next for us in 2021? Well, as Marlene said, our priority is now to get back into the schools, which we hope we'll be able to do after Easter, and continue to deliver our face-to-face debating, because nothing is more satisfying than debating and arguing with people personally in a room. As great as our Zoom debates were, the dynamics of debating are slightly lost online. Having said that, the Zoom debates did prove that we could roll out our program throughout the Western Cape and potentially through South Africa with the right software, with the right design program. And those are our challenges for this year. Our relationship with USB is obviously fundamental. They've offered assistance with funding through their alumni and contacts. They've obviously got technology experience to build and help us design our program, both through staff and students. They have extensive introductions and partnerships throughout the Cape and South Africa. And students hopefully will be able to help as mentors and educators and facilitators. So the connection is very strong on very, very many levels. And it's something we really value. As Marlene said, I cannot find anything but praise for and delight being taken on as one of their social community partners. But we have challenges as a charity. COVID has hit all charities last year. Funding has been difficult. And our priority now, as we try to expand this year, is how to get our name out there, how to stand out from other NPOs. We pride ourselves on a professionalism. I think that comes from both of us being lawyers. But we hope that what we're doing is helping to fill in the gaps and the inequality in education that Armand started off by talking about. We need to support our students with data, with technology, with devices, and with mentors and educators. And we're doing this because ultimately we want to create a society where youth are active citizens and engaged in bettering their own communities. We plan to roll out our program across South Africa. We are going to monetize it for private schools and have debating competitions taking place across the country. It would obviously be fantastic if we could have other universities help us, whether they were in South Africa or worldwide, who could help with technology and student support. We obviously need financial support to help roll it out across South Africa, And if any of you out there knows technology supporters or people who can help us roll out our ambitious online program, we'd love to hear from them. I think now we'll throw it open to, oh no, we're not, we're moving on to the next speakers.
Thanks, Amanda. Just before we move on to Junaid, there was a question, and maybe Marlene, you can just address this in terms of developing a voice of children has many challenges. One of them is the way parents or caregivers raise their children. How is Taurus Foundation building the bridges to the parents to have mutual understanding of the importance of children's voices?
Okay, that's actually a very good question, because we have been very conscious of that, especially during COVID, because it was a little bit easier in working in schools, because while the kids were in school, it was an after-school debating program and parents were pretty invested in that as well. But once it came to COVID and the kids were at home, it was quite a lot harder to get the parents on board, because they felt, oh, you know, the children should be studying for their exams, they should be doing their schoolwork, they should be helping at home. But what we did was we actually spoke to some of the parents directly. Our team on the ground spoke to the parents and explained to them that this was actually a very worthwhile course for their children, and how actually the teachers had said that their grades had improved and their participation in school had improved from our program. And also, I think some of the parents were worried about the cost of it. And we also provided devices and data. So actually, at the end of the day, most parents of the students did get on board and actually thought we were doing a very good thing.
I think, if I can interject there, I think educating the parents is as much something we do need to address as anything, especially, you know, parents who are not that involved in their children's education, or don't have quite the openness from schools to have meetings with teachers and things like that. So yes, I think getting parents on board is critical, and something we will work towards even more.
Thanks a lot, Amanda, Marlene. Junaid is one of our MBA students, and Junaid has participated in the social engagement project. The value of that project, I think, extended beyond what Junaid originally thought it was going to deliver. And importantly, connected to that assignment is the organization that Junaid was able to impact on. And so I'm going to hand over to Junaid and Khairinisa just to give you an indication of how it is that through our curriculum, we have been able to impact at a different level of society.
Thank you, Dr. Bam. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Junaid Sonday, and I'm a final year MBA student at University of Stellenbosch Business School. As part of the completion of the MBA program, we were tasked to action a social engagement project whereby we would interview a CEO or chairperson of a nonprofit organization for our business and society module. Now, before I talk about the social engagement project, I'd like to highlight that every business assignment which we submit to the business school always has to address the business society aspects. Furthermore, this is further entrenched by including it as part of the marking rubric guidelines which students align to while completing the assignment from a group and individual perspective. As part of our learning journey, USB encouraged reflective learning approach, and I'll be reflecting on some key aspects during my social engagement project. Now, at first, this project was a daunting experience, as my exposure to assisting communities was very limited. As I was progressing through my first year of my MBA, I felt the program was transforming my mindset into becoming this responsible leader for the future. This social engagement project was honestly the best experience of my MBA journey thus far, and I've mentioned this to Dr. Bam on several occasions. During the interview with the CEO of Mustarafin Foundation, an awakening occurred within myself on how many challenges our communities face on a day-to-day basis, from hunger, gangsterism, sexual abuse. At one point during the interview, I felt emotional and humbled by listening to the CEO expressing her concerns and challenges which she faces on a day-to-day basis. I reflect on this as prior to embarking on the MBA journey, my goal of climbing the corporate ladder and working towards the next big promotion was insignificant. I had a mind shift change in evaluating how can I play a more important role within the communities and climb the ladder for responsible leadership instead of climbing the corporate ladder. Some of the key reflective points of the social engagement project interview with Mustarafin, which I've learned, was as follows. Mustarafin's core focus was this SDG, level 4 quality of education, and not only SDG 2, no hunger, and the continuing doing exceptional work within the previous disadvantaged communities. Mustarafin's foundation, excellent financial governance, whereby they actually undergo 2 audits per year. That's right, guys, 2 audits per year for the NPO. That's amazing. Ensuring that the financial governance is 100% in place, but yet you have traditional business sometimes failing due to following incomplete financial governance processes. Mustarafin Foundation staff sometimes exposed to life-threatening situations in the areas which they operate. This was definitely a tear-jerking moment for me as here I am in a comfortable corporate position and thinking of all my challenges which I face, whereas this can't even come close to not even one of the challenges which Mustarafin Foundation staff faces on a day-to-day basis. Furthermore, Mustarafin Foundation also lost staff members during the COVID-19 pandemic, but still persevered in serving the community. Mustarafin only accepts funding from sources which align to the SDG objectives. I found this remarkable as during COVID-19 pandemic, the organization experienced still experiencing financial constraints, but still refused to take on any donor funding from gang leaders within the community which they operate and corporates which is not aligned to the SDG focused objectives. Some closing comments, we need to identify opportunities to pay forward, and I've personally learned from this, and I've made a personal commitment to assist Mustarafin Foundation in achieving their objectives. Lastly, I'm proud to say that I'm also one of the beneficiaries which organizations such as Mustarafin has supported during my childhood journey. Now, we all heard the saying, not all superheroes wear a cape, but I'm convinced that the person I'm about to introduce to you most definitely on that caliber. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you today the CEO of Mustarafin Foundation, Mrs. Haydenissa Johnston Cassim. Thank you.
Shukran for that, Junaid. Assalamu alaikum. I greet you with a universal greeting of peace be upon you, Mulweni. Good afternoon, good morning to all those there. Namaste to all of you. First and foremost, I thank Junaid. I thank Armand Bam. We come a long way. Armand, thank you for the opportunity given to us. But first and foremost, the organization who just told us, organization who just spoke before you, Junaid, I think there's so many similarities that we have, and it's definitely something, Amanda, that we need to work together for the benefit of our community within the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, because that's the organization that Mr. Daffy Foundation is working with. And a lot of the things that you've mentioned is things that this organization is involved with. And as Junaid has mentioned as well, Mr. Daffy Foundation, as one of the founding members and as a woman within the organization in 1986, when we were established, we can just go to the next slide. You know, when we were established, it was due to the violence within Crossroads. And it was a community that came from a rural background that weren't necessarily lived within the Western Cape. And the challenge that we had at that point in time was, first of all, it was a communication, which was language that we had. But the interaction and the focus at that time was women and children, and seeing to the needs of women and children. 1992 made the organization realize that even though we were working with women, the abuse of women have not stopped. And up to date, you can see our 16 days of activism programs. The need for the empowerment of women does not necessarily mean that the abuse of women will stop. So the organization looked at the overall activity of families. Therefore, our 5 core functions that we run, which is community development, poverty alleviation, education, disaster relief, and health. Overally, the organizations make, in the next slide, you can actually, overally the organization, when we work within particularly community development, was looking at how do we change the perception of our community, and particularly the communities that we're working in. Firstly, we were established in a community where it was predominantly Xhosa speaking. But then the other, partly as was one of that aspect, and then looking at a community that also needs assistance, because like Armand will tell you, the communities, and particularly what we will classify colored, is actually also very much the forgotten community that is not being looked at within the Western Cape, because a lot of focus is being directed in a different aspect, because it is not something that is being done, but the community that we are working with, and we work overally, because the problems that you are faced with is not just within whether you're speaking Xhosa, whether you're speaking Afrikaans, or whether you're speaking English. Western Cape, like Junaid has mentioned, and within the areas that we are working, is gang-ridden. Just Saturday, while we were doing a workshop, and we bringing about in our early childhood development programs, we bring about training to introduce sign language within our early childhood development programs, because the organization believes in the inclusiveness of education. So bringing about that, you had to duck because bullets were flying in Manenberg. And we felt that that was the closest place for us to meet, being that the center was equipped. It was close to transport, and yet it was the most unsafe place to be on Saturday. And you'll find that in Hanover Park as well, which is, as Amanda, you mentioned, the Cape Flats, the areas that you're working in, where schools had to be closed. We work within that environment. We've lost of our own workers within that environment, but our workers are from that environment as well. Just to take you back, in 1986, of the women, those are women who's employed, who stood in the line of Mr. Daphne Foundation for food. And yes, we feed 27,000 people on a day-to-day basis. But that same people are now employed by the organization, and we are run predominantly by women. So out of the 62 staff, 4 are men, the rest are women. And I must say, committed women who are from the community, as mentioned, but also are there to serve the very community that they're working in, have become self-sufficient, self-reliant, but it's also many of them have been educated. They could not read, they could not write, or the challenge was they could maybe not speak English or Afrikaans, so communication. So part of our adult development was education and the bringing in pre-ABIT programs of focus for the organization. For Junaid, that was a change because within Cape Town, Mr. Rafin has been seen as an organization who are active with disaster and feeding. Ask us to cook a pot of food. You will see we will be cooking 100-liter pots of food. If you can see the enormity of those pots of food, we'll be able to feed 30,000 people at a lapse of within 3 hours when a disaster strike, which has been achieved, whether it was in the tornado in 1999, the xenophobia that we've had. We at one particular day, we didn't even know we fed 52,000 people. So that is what many people see as a strength within the organization in providing quality meals, nutritional meals. Yet for Junaid, it was a shock to know that within our community development and education and poverty alleviation programs, we concentrate on education, early childhood development. We've probably made 21 of those self-sufficient, self-reliant, and independent. All of those teachers were educated through this organization over the last 36 years within the organization. Of them have moved into different directions after their training. We have qualified child and youth care workers, but most of all, when we started our program in Tafelsig, when we realized that there is so many children not even in a school environment, we established a learning center. And within that 3 years, with the grace and mercy of our Lord, and Junaid, I said this to Junaid, we could send 486 children back to school who's never been in a school environment, but place them in an environment. If they were in grade 1, grade 5, grade 6, they were placed in the necessary environment where they should be. And where the schools in Tafelsig has then asked us, and we've developed a partnership with the schools, where the schools have asked us, can't we assist them with the children who has learning disabilities? Now, Cape Town has a history, or the Western Cape has a history, due to the TOT system that we've had. Our community, our farm workers were paid not only, they weren't paid a salary, but they were given alcohol, and that has made the position of our situation worse in the sense of the phase child, the alcohol fetal syndrome child, the ADD child, the ADHD, and that is the community that we are working with and the children that we're working with. And Amanda, when you spoke about the challenges within that and the intervention that you've done, it's very similar to what the organization is doing and has done. So you found at the school in Edendale in Manenberg, where children, the first thing we were asked, what would you like to become one day? Out of 719 pupils, the one child who stood up and said, I'm going to be a hitman. And it was shocking for us to realize that that was what this child would want to become one day. And therefore, the intervention and therefore education in Mustadafin Foundation is such a priority, and how we look at what needs to be done. So a lot of the things that you've mentioned is a lot of the things that the organization is currently doing. And I do believe that we with TOES need to really work together. We can probably impact far more if we become a collective team within the Western Cape, and particularly the Cape Flats areas. the organization in itself, from a perspective of women, has faced many challenges in the sense of how people perceived women, particularly women dressed as I am, because you don't fit in a particular criteria of what people want you to be and how they perceived you to be, in a sense of being the voice of an organization that has a history as deep rooted in the Western Cape as the Mustadafin Foundation. So we've had many challenges, but most of the challenges in itself is the fact that the organization is an all-encompassing organization. We don't work with Muslims. We don't work with Christians. We work with human beings. And because of that, our activity talks about our interaction from no matter who you are, where you come from. And in retrospect to that, it's also how our employment strategy has been part of. So you don't employ people who come from one particular background, but comes from an inclusive, diverse background with a common goal to serve. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. So when you look at the organization, we partnered with social development. We partnered with disaster relief when it came to disaster. And I mean, our late Helen Ziller, Mayor, and as well as Premier said, well, there's one organization that she knows that is there for the first time, the first organization to be present when a disaster, Mustadafin, and they're also the last to leave. So our voices and our organization is felt quite deep. But beyond that, we are called, before we are called by disaster management or social development, the community has already given us a call to say we are in need of assistance. So we're very grounded in a sense of where the organization is and our differences that we're doing. So within our educational programs, we run literacy classes and we have success stories besides the fact that we've sent 486 pupils back to school. We have children with was in our early childhood development programs that is at university. Under their third year, some who's qualified with social workers who gives off the airtime. And one of our youth who was also part of our volunteer program, who stopped with the place where he was working and said, I want to become a social worker. And he's now a qualified social worker, worked within Mustadafin for a year and then moved into social development because he felt that he could do better. And we are grateful for young men who has developed, and you know, those for me has always been great. The women whom could not read and write, the first one who said, you know what, now I can understand my Bible better, and when the priest talked to me, I can read what he says, and I'm no longer a person who cannot read. I can assist my child when the child comes to school. And this was a grandmother of 70 years old already. So, you know, the impact that education has within the community is important. And therefore, the organization has the concept of hashtag feed the belly, feed the mind, because it's an important aspect. Because if you are hungry, you can also not think. And therefore, the balance that we have, and a lot of, even though we have 5 core functions, a lot of that 5 core functions is interrelated to the work that you do. You cannot do community development without poverty alleviation. So there's been a lot of things that the organization has done in the sense of gardening, creating self-sufficiency, self-reliance through independence, and that is through education. And this, in retrospect, talks about what Junaid has said. If you just go to the next slide, Junaid, about Mustadafin. The objective of the organization is very clear: the promotion of cultural and education advancement of the oppressed in South Africa, to raise the consciousness of the oppressed, the destitute, by providing a forum for the discussion on alternatives which encourage a critical analysis of society. And Amanda, you can identify because you spoke about those things, and also to empower the needy, the destitute, and the deprived through education so that they participate in running their affairs, and also facilitate support and network with other organizations in developing the needs of our community. So our objectives has been very clear in that. perspective. And I see the relation of what Amanda spoke about earlier. So now you can go to the next slide, to what we have achieved. And if you look at the impact of the donations received, even though there was very little funding, I would want you to look at just the impact of 2020 within COVID last year. And for us in itself, the success stories talks about what we could do with limited funding. And when I say limited funding, there was a period of time I'm saying, how am I going to pay 62 staff members who have not stopped working, who have had losses within their family, including my family, who have had losses within staff of our own staff, our chairperson, who've also, in this respect, we've lost close people. But you know what? The team is up there and they are moving and they're doing what they do best. And for that, we can be grateful that they have not given up, knowing the challenges, knowing COVID, that it could impact them and how it would impact them, not just them as individuals, but also going home to their families. Our successes talks about we are recognized nationally as one of the 5 welfare relief organizations. And to be partnered with Red Cross is amazing, with Red Cross is International, where we work within 2 areas, which is one area in Eastern Cape and within the Western Cape, which is within the Cape Flats as well as within the rural areas. But the fact that we are still going strong, 35 years, we've received numerous awards, including myself, and to date, with little or no funding at times, we feed 27,910 seniors, children, those who have not, sometimes have not been fed. I mean, Shamima goes into a rural area and this man comes to her and she's, I am walking, this is as we are going into a rural area like Toosrivier, Beaufort West and Ningsville, and this man says, for 3 days, I'm walking towards something, and they could see that the man could hardly walk. And she said, this man said for 3 days, he has not eaten nor his family, and he's walking towards where he can get food. So this team, as they are driving for their breakfast, all beautifully done, hands this man their breakfast, because this is about 6 o'clock in the morning, hands this man their breakfast and says to the man, look, we're about to do distribution within 3 hours because the pots of food is going up. And for her, the impact it had on her made a 365 change within her commitment to serve and not to see Mr. Dafine Foundation as just an opportunity to work, but a calling that we need to do what we need to do for a community, that if we don't do something within the Western Cape, and Amanda, you possibly, and Armand, if you know historically, if we don't do something within the Western Cape on education, but meaningful education, inclusiveness, understanding that within the colored community, we have a time bomb that talks about if we do not look at alternative education and not what is being given to us, our children are going to be left on the way. Because therefore the early dropouts, therefore kids that is not going to school, therefore the need for our parents to be part and parcel of that. So I thank you for the opportunity that you've given to Mr. Dafine Foundation here, Armand, Junaid, and the team itself. We are truly appreciative. And just to understand where we come from and what we're doing. And I always feel I do an injustice to my organization. But shukran, enkos kakulu, baie dankie. Thank you for the time given to Mr. Dafine Foundation. We truly appreciate that.
Thanks so much, Khairunisa. I think Amanda, Marlene, and Junaid might want to make yourselves visible now. There's just a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, and we can just have a discussion. And if there are any more questions that pop up in the Q&A, we'll address those. Universities as institutions, and if we look at where it is that we are located, in South Africa are quite a distance away. And I mean that economically, geographically, in many different ways, they are away from the people you have spoken about. So what is it that universities, and particularly an institution like the business school, can do, or you'd expect them to do, in terms of assisting you with delivering on your mandate as community or grassroots organizations? And then Junaid, from a student perspective, what more can universities do? So Junaid, maybe you start off first.
So yeah, thank you, Dr. Bam. From my side, most definitely what I've experienced so far from USB incorporating the business and society in every single module, that has been definitely a starting point and a liftment towards how to make students and make people more aware in terms of our responsibility to society. I think maybe instead of having the module as a once a quarter or one semester module, maybe looking at having the module across for the full year, because I definitely see the impact. I definitely see the value that has given me in my personal capacity, especially within my professional capacity as well. So definitely maybe just broadening it from USB's perspective to make it maybe it's a 12-month module. And yeah, this is the first time I've experienced this module. I've attended 2 other institutions within Cape Town, and I've never been exposed to. So I think from a USB's perspective, they definitely pioneers offering this module within an MBA course, and definitely I salute USB. Thank you, Dr. Bam.
Thanks, Junaid. Marlene and Amanda, when we look at, and I know you said there's not much negative you want to say about USB, but maybe not located in terms of this relationship. But when we look at institutions, tertiary institutions within a country like South Africa, what do you think that partnership should look like? Where is it that there can be improvements made? And for anybody listening, you know, in terms of developing a program similar to what it is we're doing, what are some of the takeaways you want to share with them?
Amanda, shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first, yeah.
So I think, Armand, in terms of that, I think certainly more student engagement probably with our students, because I think certainly our students come from very disadvantaged backgrounds, and I think a lot of them don't feel that they can go forward in education, and they feel that, you know, they're not good enough. And the reason, and our program is really to build their confidence and build their self-esteem. But actually, they would probably get a lot more talking to students who get to good university, who are from probably their backgrounds, students who sort of can be their mentors, who can show them that you know, they have possibilities and that they can go forward in their life. So that would be, I think, one big area where it would be great if there was sort of a society of students or a program where they could possibly like officially mentor one student or 2 students, you know, while they're at university. I think also possibly visits to universities by our students, so they can actually, you know, see the institutions and see, and that will probably also incentivize them to study harder, work harder, to try and aspire to that. Probably more talks, maybe given by professors or students, again, to encourage them about community engagement, you know, political engagement, social engagement. So I think those are the few things I would say that universities can certainly do to help organizations such as ours.
I agree with all of that, but I think to have role models in a university when you have got no one really in your life you can confer with or discuss decisions with, or even discuss prospect of going to university or what you might study there. If there was a pool of mentors or an assigned mentor to a student, it would be fantastic. Plus, I think university students make great facilitators on our debate training course. And if we're going to roll out online, we'll need people with that proficiency. I think it's quite hard having this conversation with the business school, because the business school is a higher level than an ordinary university, but I think it applies to Stellenbosch across the board. Just the value of students in assisting upcoming students, really.
Thanks, Amanda, Marlene. What's very interesting about your question, the answer is none of it had to do with money. And that's the general expectation in these types of relationships. But there's an ability to share and leverage of the resources that are already in the system. And I think that's quite critical. The other aspect of this notion of mentorship within a country like ours, what does it look like, or who is a mentor and who can play that type of role is quite critical. And that doesn't cost us anything as academics. Yeah. It doesn't cost us anything as students. It's just the availability and the presence to engage with these types of programs. Karenisa, you spoke of this notion of collective, a collective approach. And often what I experience when I look at, in the sense of corporate social responsibility, how it is that people try and address these social issues, it's done in a siloed manner. So each organization does its own thing. Maybe if you can just give us a little bit more insight in terms of what it looks like to you as an organization, as an activist, and the role that a university can play in ensuring that that collective action is taken.
A lot of things. I mean, if I just look at what the collaboration could be between Marlene, Amanda, and I mean the Taurus Foundation versus Mustadafin Foundation, there's so many things that we are doing which is similar. And actually, in fact, when you spoke, I said, but we do this, but we do that, we do it, and you know, but understanding that the political arena. I think the one thing that I've experienced within the NGO world, not everybody has the heart for community development. It's become a business. I think sometimes worse than business. It's like cutthroat business within the environment that you're working in. And I could not understand that. In understanding that we're here to serve and we're here to change our community. But from a perspective of what the USB can do is the fact that students can become socially responsible. Because like it was mentioned earlier, we know as political activists of the past of what role we played and how things change because of the youth and because of students in engagement. But to bring some programs, and this I'm asking to you again, bring some programs to the people, and particularly the areas that we're working in. And I know it's not the best. You've experienced that as well. But to bring that closer to where it is, because we can't come to you. And partnering within the workshops, but accredited. So the first thing my youth is going to ask, yeah, you're sending us to all these workshops. When are we going to get jobs? We want jobs because we want money. You know, those are the type of questions people say every time it's a workshop. But how does this workshops become an accredited by the university in itself that you are offering to these young men and women, some of them in matric, some of them who don't have matric, but would want to improve what they are doing. Like we've got the men program that we're currently doing, Men of Change. And immediately with the Men of Change, there's been a change within in just the manner of speech and the communication and language, because you know in the Western Cape, we don't have a language. Also, taal is nie ons taal nie. So the language spoken is, we need to teach people to speak correct, to communicate effectively. But we also need the facilities that are central for all And unfortunately, you are not there. But the one thing that I'm saying, the social responsibility needs to become very much part. We need to look at what it is that we as organizations can do to improve the quality of life for all. And if we are true to our nature and our mission, we should be doing that. And I'm already saying, Marlene, Amanda, we can do that. And I know as women we can. I'm not against you, nothing against men out there.
Thanks, Kairunisa. I'm going to leave the last sort of word to Junaid because he's dropped in the chat there that he's going to change. He's looking at how it is that he shifts into a different space. So, Junaid, the impact of engaging on this in this assignment, if you can have the last word to tell us personally how that has shifted your views. Yeah, you need to unmute.
Maybe let me take a step back in terms of the positions that I've occupied through my professional career. And it has been in terms of leadership roles. And I feel that this journey especially within this assignment has allowed me to transfer from being from a manager leader into more of a transformational leader. And I feel with the skills and knowledge that I've acquired thus far, especially now that we're also doing perspectives on African frontiers, I feel that I'm ready to now to explore more avenues from on African content. And we've actually did a case study, and I heard one of the panel members also discussing Malawi, and I actually did an in-detail analysis on the Malawi. And for me, there are certain things the skills that I feel that I can contribute and have a greater effect on the African content, Dr. Bam. Thank you.
Thanks, Junaid. At this stage, let me just read this last. If this is a question, the SDGs are in themselves a platform to raise the profile of social engagement with NGOs and may well be a bridging opportunity to engage with USBs and other SA university links to international organizations with strong associations with social justice projects within their own curriculum. Could this potentially be a strategic approach to network and influential and interested academics? Yes, Gordon, as one of the things I've realized when it is that you have activists in a room is that you need to listen to them in terms of what it is that they're expressing and to make the space to listen. And this particular point of how this, the projects can be connected and what else can be connected to these projects was something that I was busy thinking about. So definitely, yes. And if there's anybody that's interested in seeing how it is that we can collaborate, how it is that we can strengthen these organizations through what it is that we do as institutions, then please do reach out to us and let's see where it takes us all. It's always a notion of putting that first step and that foot forward. And as an activist myself, Kairunisa would know, the bureaucracy of an institution like a university at times is cumbersome, but activists know how to get things done. And that's the intention here, to connect people, to ensure that we talk about what's happening on the grassroots, to showcase what is happening through our platforms that we have. And so I'm appreciative to Kairunisa and Amanda, Marlene, Junaid for coming and taking the time to share their stories. To Fiona, Andrew, and Tracy, thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity just to have a glimpse into what it is that we are trying to get going.
Thank you so much, Armand, for leading and organizing today's webinar. A huge thank you to all of our speakers in the webinar today, as Armand said, to himself and to Marlene, Amanda, Kairunisa and Junaid. It was great to really hear from the university students and partners on all the issues of social impact and the invaluable role that the university can play in driving equity in South Africa, and I think inspiring for us all to think how we can do better as universities across the world. So I think we need to all be thinking about how we can work within our societies, and USB are really setting the standard for that transformational change with their ethics, responsibility and sustainability that Armand spoke about there in the beginning. And it's really great to hear about your experience, Junaid, and delighted to hear that you're also doing some work on Malawi as well. And I look forward to seeing that in due course. I'm sure you've all been equally inspired as well as I have by the work of both the Torres and the Mustafeen Foundations. And I'm sure that will be the start of interest for lots of individuals and organizations that are here with us today. And I hope some of the students attending today will also be the future mentors for your programs, as you were talking about there. I'll just share my screen quickly. To remind everyone that we have one last event coming up next week, which is our webinar from our partners at Peking University, who will be looking at the issue of interdependencies and SDGs, and particularly looking at carbon systems. So, for example, considering issues around carbon and air quality and health. And if I stop sharing, I just want to finish off today by saying there's lots of work that goes on behind these webinars, and people who do lots of a huge amount of work to make sure that they go smoothly that we never see. Fiona Doyle, that Armand mentioned, does a lot of work to make sure these go smoothly, and we're very grateful to her. But I'd like to give a special recognition today to Alan McCleave, who makes sure these Zoom webinars work, they go smoothly, they're recorded, and we get those recordings to share with you later on because it's Alan's birthday. So very happy birthday to you today, Alan. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing all of you next week at the last webinar. Thanks very much.